Alright, welcome back, Sebastian here. So one last video in 2023, and today I want to talk about who I think was the best drivers in Formula One in 2023. So on the board, I have my power rankings, basically a summary of the results of my power rankings I did after every race this past season. And if you watched any of the team reviews I did, these numbers are exactly the same. But just to make things a little different, I've added their best result, their best score, their worst score as well. The drivers that have a number underlined, that's in either the best or the worst column, that result was in the very first race of the season. It was not kind of replicated in any other week. And I just kind of want to look at this data, talk about it, and maybe talk about my power rankings going into next year. So of course, best driver of a Formula One season, that's obviously a pretty contentious topic, I would think. But this year, I think it's pretty clear cut. Verstappen on average 1.1, best 1, first, worst second. So he never was worse than second on my power rankings. And I think obviously definitely a statistical anomaly if I had done this if I had a channel before, or when I keep doing this in the future. I don't think we'll ever see a driver anytime soon have a worst of second. Then after that, I think you have a group of three drivers. You have Alonso, Hamilton, and Norris. Alonso on average 4th, Hamilton on average 4.3, and then Norris on average 4.6. Their best for Alonso first, he was the only other driver besides Verstappen to be ranked first on my power rankings, worst 8th. For Hamilton, best second, worst 9th, and for Norris, best second, worst 14th, which was Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Now, I think after Verstappen, I think you can make a really good argument for any of those three drivers as being the second best driver in 2023. I think you can kind of add Leclerc to that conversation as well, though. For Leclerc, he's kind of on his own here. 5.7, best result, second, and worst, 9th. Then we have Albon, kind of the best driver from the bottom 4 teams by quite a significant margin, and that's something that I'm going to talk on a bit later. But for him, for Albon, 7th on average, best weekend, second, worst 15th. Then we get to Russell, on average 8th, best 3rd, worst 12th, ahead of Sainz, 9.1 on average, best 3rd, worst 18th. And I think, if you just asked me who I thought had a better season between Russell and Sainz, I probably would have picked Sainz, but he had quite a few weekends at the beginning of the season that in the low double digits, which really dragged down his average. I think if you took his results from the second third of the season, Sainz would be ahead of Russell by a bit of a margin there. So a bit odd how that result kind of came about. Then we have Piastri, 9.6, best 4th, worst 7th. Gasly on average 10th, best 5th, worst 15th. Ocon on average 10.3, best 4th, worst 20th. And one of the trends I noticed putting up this board is that, each, for the best result, it's almost perfectly first, second, third, fourth, and then Gasly kind of ruins it, 4th, 5th, 4th. So kind of in order of, being able to get to that top peak, having that, best peak over the course of the whole season, which is something I definitely did not plan. But very interesting that it turned out that way. Then we get into the second half of the board. Of course, we had 22 drivers in 2023. So we start with Tsunoda on average 11th, best of 6, worst weekend of 16th. Perez 12.2 on average, best 3rd, worst 20th. Bottas on average 13.9, best 5th, and the line of course means that result came in from the Bahrain Grand Prix the first weekend of the season, worst 18th. Stroll 15.1, best 9th, worst 20th. Hülkenberg on average 15.1, but I've just written him below Stroll even though they're tied. Best 12th, worst 19th. Lawson 15.2, best 12th, worst 17th. Ricciardo 15.7, best 14th, worst 19th. Now it's a bit odd that Lawson is ahead of Ricciardo. I do think one thing that kind of played into that is that expectations for Lawson were significantly lower than they were for Ricciardo. Lawson, of course, coming in as a rookie, and Ricciardo basically a well-seasoned veteran with over 10 years of experience in Formula One. Magnussen 15.9, best of 11th, worst of 20th. Zhou 16.8, best of 12th, worst of 20th. Sargent on average 19th, best of 13th, of course, first weekend of the season, worst of 20th. And then last, De Vries 19.6, best position 18th, worst 20th. So we basically only had 2 drivers who got to first place, and we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different drivers in 20th. I think, so a lot more drivers at the bottom, which I think is probably a bit more reasonable, a bit more normal to expect. I know one of the big criticisms of my power rankings over the course of the year was that I did not change my my power rankings from one race weekend to another were not independent. So for example, if I was doing power rankings for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, for example, I would take into account results from the previous Grand Prix in Brazil, Mexico, and maybe even COTA as well. So for example, in the Mexican Grand Prix one, I know there was complaints about Ricciardo being ranked. I believe that was one of the weekends he was 14th. I think he had been 19th the weekend before, so he moved up 5 positions, which is pretty reasonable. But of course, coming in without kind of that knowledge, without knowing about how I do my power rankings, seeing Ricciardo in 14th would make very little sense. So that's obviously understandable. The other thing as well that I kind of realized as the season kind of went along is that if you look in the top half and the bottom half, for example, the drivers in the bottom 4 teams, Albon here, and then all the other drivers are in the bottom half. And you can make an argument that, you know, the best drivers usually end up in the best seats, so that's fair. But at the same time, you have drivers like Stroll, who basically have an average that is higher than Hülkenberg, Lawson, Ricciardo, and you can, Magnussen, I think it's close, but with Hülkenberg, Lawson, Ricciardo, I think you can make an argument that they had better seasons on average than Stroll. So it's just kind of one of those weird things, especially, for example, with Perez. I think you could probably make a good argument the same way Bottas had a better season, I think, relative to expectations than Perez. And I think the whole kind of the point that I'm trying to make is I think that there were some weaknesses with this. For example, Verstappen was basically nailed to first place for the majority of the season. You had drivers like De Vries, who in his 10 races basically alternated between 18th and 20th, Sargent as well, even though he has a couple good results that were not in the bottom 2. For the most part, he basically bounced between 19th and 20th the whole season. So I think the one thing that I think I'm kind of debating going into next year is, do I kind of continue the same format, or do I kind of treat each race weekend independently? You know, obviously you would get a lot more different results treating each race independently. Las Vegas, I think, being a good example. If that was a standalone power ranking, very good chance Charles Leclerc would be number 1, and Verstappen would probably be number 2, number 3, that kind of things. Given that he did get, even though he won the Grand Prix, he did get a 5-second time penalty. So that's all, kind of just chatting about power rankings and kind of talking about who I thought the best drivers in the season were. I think just to finish up, I think you can make a very good argument for, you know, obviously I think Verstappen standalone best driver, but in that kind of second group, you can make a very good argument for Alonso, Hamilton, and Norris. I think kind of a bit further afield, I think Albon and Tsunoda, I think, had really solid seasons as well. Of course, the other thing that's really tricky with Formula One is that your teammate is your biggest comparison. Of course, for Albon, having Sargent as your teammate, it's a bit of an easier job than, say, for Stroll, who has Alonso as a teammate. Same with Tsunoda. He, of course, his teammates were De Vries, Lawson, and Ricciardo, 2 part-timers and a rookie who is not a particularly strong rookie as well. So, of course, the perception of how good of a driver you are in F1 is so heavily influenced by who your teammates are, right? Like, Perez, when he was with Stroll, was seen as an excellent driver, and now in this last couple of years, being matched up against Verstappen, he's seen as not such a good driver. So it's one of those strange things, very, very hard to control for, deal with, but you know, we try as best as we can. So last video of 2023. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.